Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Brittnee. One of my all-time favorite chocolates is just a classic chocolate-covered chewy caramel. If I go to a chocolate shop somewhere, that is definitely one of the first things that I am looking for to buy. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how to hand dip or enrobe by hand the chewy caramels that I made in last week's video. After I share with you some important tips for dipping, I will experiment with a bunch of decorations and I'm super excited. So let's get started. First, you'll need something to dip. You can dip lots of different things like ganache, jellies, layered chocolates, fudge, even brownie squares. But like I said, I'm using caramel. So my first step is to cut my caramels into squares. You can do any size that you like, but I will say if they're a little too small or a little too big, they can be tricky to dip. You can also cut them into rectangles if you like that look better. Okay, my caramels are prepared. Now let me grab all of my decorating and other supplies. You maybe have seen a video I filmed like 2 or 3 years ago about holographic chocolate. So one thing I'll show you again today is how to make holographic chocolate with diffraction grating sheets. So here's one supply. I'll also be testing out some transfer sheets. I still just have a bunch of these Valentine's ones, so that's what I'll be using just to show you today. Good old-fashioned parchment paper, some acetate. This isn't that groundbreaking, but some sea salt, some edible luster dusts. I'm going to be using my favorite gold edible luster dust and rose gold today. Along with the luster dust, I like to use this little plastic palette to hold it, and some lemon extract to make it into paint. This little dropper is also super handy with lemon extract. I'll link all of this down below as well. Along with your lusters, you might want some brushes, some little sponge brushes, and also a variety of paint brushes, some for mixing and some for the decoration, and some for dusting. You'll see the specific ones I use later. A couple piping tips. They'll depend on what size chocolates you're making, but I'm using Attico 807 and Wilton 8B star tip. And we're gonna do some little stamping technique. Some edible gold leaf and pliers to help apply it. Some toothpicks, some caramel chocolate. You can use any other kind of chocolate. You can even color white chocolate if you wanna use a color. An airbrush, and a parchment paper piping bag. I'll make this really quick. So we'll use all of those things for decorations, and then you'll also need some chocolate dipping forks. I'll link these, of course. A good thermometer, a nice deep bowl for dipping, a heat gun, and always a lot of paper towels. I'm going to use milk chocolate today because that's what I prefer for chocolate covered caramels. And so the first step is to temper your chocolate. Today I'll be tempering the chocolate using my cryo. A couple pros to my cryo is that it's simple to do easy to be successful at, and it sets up quickly. With molded chocolates, when chocolate sets up quickly, like when you temper with my cryo, that can be frustrating because if you're doing multiple molds, it starts to cool down and set up while you're still working. But for dipping, it's great if the chocolate sets up fast after you get it onto the parchment paper, because then it's less likely to keep running down and leave a big foot underneath your dipped chocolate. If you follow the instructions, tempering with my cryo is basically foolproof, which is great because that means you don't run any risk of having any sort of bloom or the slightest bit of streaking on the outside of your dipped chocolate. So if you need to learn how to temper using my cryo, check out my video in this card. I'll also link it down below, and let's get dipping. So I've just heated up my chocolate to its top temperature, and FYI, this is 2.5 pounds of chocolate. There is no way I need that much for this amount of caramels, but the more chocolate you have, the longer it will stay in temper as you dip. And hand dipping chocolates can be somewhat time consuming, and it'll take me an especially long time today because I'm testing multiple designs along with filming. So I need my chocolate to not cool down too quickly as I work. Now I'm just going to pour the chocolate into this deep glass bowl so that you guys can see what I'm doing better. And while my chocolate cools down a bit, let me prepare some of my decorations that I'll need to have ready as I dip. First, I'll cut my transfer sheets into small squares. I'm doing 3 of every design today, so I cut out 3 squares. Next, I wrinkle up this small sheet of parchment paper and then also cut it into 3 squares. For the acetate design, I cut it first into a strip wide enough to cover the chocolate, and then I take it and fold it into rows as small as I possibly can so that it ends up in a zigzag pattern. And once I'm done folding, I cut out, you guessed it, 3 squares. And no surprise here, all I do with the diffraction grating sheet is cut it into 3 squares. And if you want to learn how the diffraction grating works, check out my video in this card. So I've finished tempering my chocolate off camera, and now I'm going to set up my workstation. I've got my caramels in front of me, easy to grab. I need my heat gun right next to my bowl of chocolate for dipping. Since I'm right-handed, I put a fresh piece of parchment paper where I'll set down my dipped caramels on my right. Then I set all the decorations that I'll apply straight onto the tops of the chocolates right in front of me. And I like to have them near the edge of the counter where I can slide them off because sometimes they can be tricky to pick up. A mini spatula for stirring my chocolate, my thermometer, and behind my bowl of chocolate, right in front of me, a paper towel and my dipping forks. Before I start dipping, I check my chocolate temperature. For transfer sheets, you don't want your chocolate to be too cool or they won't properly transfer. So make sure your chocolate is at least 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. To dip the caramel, I drop it straight into my bowl of chocolate, push it down a bit below the surface, and then use my fork to cover the top with chocolate. This is much easier with a wider working area because you want to be able to hold your fork as level to the chocolate as possible. The edge of the bowl is getting in my way. What I'm trying to do here, and I got smarter and finally tipped my bowl, is tap the caramel against the surface of the chocolate so that the surface tension pulls off the excess chocolate. Then carefully scrape the excess chocolate off on the edge of the bowl, and then using your other dipping fork, gently pull the caramel off and drop it down onto the parchment paper. Take your transfer sheet, set it on top of the chocolate, then carefully press down the sheet so that it's touching all areas of the top of the chocolate caramel. I like to clean my forks after each dip quickly with a paper towel to avoid the chocolate building up. Now let's dip another one. Drop it in, press it down a little, pull chocolate over to cover the top. This is also easier if you can hold your fork more level to the chocolate to get a nice thin even coat on top. Scoop it up and tap it against the surface of the chocolate. You want to avoid tapping against the hard edge of your bowl because that will just press the caramel down into the fork and make it stick, which will then make it hard to get off the fork. This is especially true with softer fillings. And the reason I'm struggling is because it's best to hold the caramel on the edge of the fork, which will help you remove it from the fork later, but it also makes it easier to accidentally keep dropping it. Make sure you put the transfer sheet textured side down, or else you won't get anything transferred onto your chocolate. With this dip, I didn't struggle so much dropping the caramel. You'll see that if you start with the caramel on the center of the fork, as you tap it, it moves to the edge exactly where you want it to be. Then you can scrape it and then easily slide it off onto your parchment. Here, I wasn't happy with my drop, so I moved the caramel back over to cover that foot I left. I just slid it over with my fork, and the chocolate left on the other side is so thin it'll break off of the chocolate once it sets, or I'll just trim it off later. So the key to getting the chocolate onto the parchment with this nice clean edge is to make sure you scrape enough of the excess chocolate off, and then you use your second dipping fork to carefully lift the caramel up a little off of the original fork and help it down onto the parchment. Try not to move the chocolate at all once it touches down, and pull your forks out from under the chocolate as quick as you can as it falls to rest onto the paper. The application for the diffraction grating is essentially the same as the transfer sheets. Just carefully press it down onto the top of your chocolate square. I should have prepared better by trying to flatten out my grating sheet. It bugged me that it was rounded from being stored in a roll, but it worked well enough for the demonstration. Don't forget to clean off your forks. Here I switched to the 2-prong fork to see if I like it better. And I think I decided I did because there are less prongs to potentially get stuck to your caramel, so it makes it a little bit easier to slide off onto the parchment. But honestly, the difference isn't that big, so either fork will do. So my method with demonstrating all of these designs is that I'm doing all the decorations that have to be applied to the dipped caramels while they're still wet first, and then I'll finish dipping the rest, let them set up. Then I'll show you the decorations that are applied onto those chocolates that have already set up. Every so often, check your temperature. As you dip, it'll drop and you need to keep it within working temperature using your heat gun to carefully warm it back up. With this many caramels, it probably would have been worth firing up my chocolate warming tank. I recommend doing that if you're dipping a lot of chocolates. It will be more efficient to work with and also easier to dip into because you'll have a nice large surface area of chocolate to work in. This dip was a good one. It's funny, over the course of dipping over 40 chocolates, you'll find that some turn out better than others, even though you're doing the exact same process. And this is why practice is important. It improves consistency. Apply the crinkled parchment paper, the exact same as the diffraction grading sheet. And apply the zigzag acetate, the exact same as the crinkled parchment paper. For a little salted caramel vibe, sprinkle on some Himalayan pink salt or sea salt onto the corner of the dipped caramel. You can also do this on the whole top, or it can also look nice to do it in a diagonal line. The salt on the first one sunk in a bit when I sprinkled right after dipping, so on the second and third ones I waited a bit before sprinkling, just enough to where the salt would stick, but not too early where it would just get absorbed into the chocolate. The next design is created using the dipping fork. This is a pretty classic enrobed chocolate look. I wanted the chocolate to begin to cool enough so that it holds more shape when I create the design. So I dip the second caramel before I do the design on the first caramel so that the chocolate has a chance to set up a bit. I just take my 3-prong fork, you can use any, 1, 2, or 3, and I press it flat into the top of the chocolate surface. Then I slowly pull it up and backwards. And yeah, I didn't see that air bubble from my angle and it has been bugging me, but I'm going to have to get over it now. And I gave this last one an extra 30 seconds or so after I dipped it before doing the design. And you'll see with this one, I actually saw the bubble in time and fixed it by just tapping and repeating the design. For the next 2 designs, I'll need some caramel chocolate. So I'm just going to use the microwave method to temper this really quick. And pour it into my parchment paper piping bag. And it was just one of those clumsy days where I make a mess. So I'm going to dip 3 caramels first and let them set up, and then dip 3 more and decorate them while they're wet to show you 2 piping decoration options. If you pipe chocolate onto the dipped caramel while it's still wet, the chocolate will sink down into it and they kind of blend together. If you pipe chocolate on after the dipped caramel is set up, the piping will sit on top and have a raised look to it. Piping after they set is a lot easier because you can worry about tempering your secondary chocolate after you're done dipping. But if you want to pipe as you go, you have to manage keeping your bowl of chocolate in temper along with keeping your piping bag of chocolate in temper. Just something to think about. So I'm just doing a simple drizzle design here, right after the caramel has been dipped. The key to a nice clean drizzle is a small hole in your piping bag and quick, consistent movement to keep your piping lines thin. Now these ones are ready, and I carefully pipe my favorite line design onto them. Okay, now I'm preparing some edible gold paint for my next 2 designs that are also applied while the chocolate is wet. Just take some dust and drop in some lemon extract and stir it together. So I'd never done this technique before, so this is me testing it out for the first time. First, I was deciding on the best way to get the gold paint onto the bottom edge of my round piping tip to use it as a stamp. I think the best way would be to have a container that would hold enough paint so I could just dip the tip straight into the paint, but I didn't want to make that much paint, So I tried to create a thin layer on this flat surface to dip it into, but it just wasn't working. It didn't get enough paint onto it. So then I just painted it on instead, and it worked a lot better. So once you get your paint onto the edge of your piping tip, carefully stamp the circle where you want it onto the surface of the chocolate. I was going for an overlapping circle design. Try not to press too deep into the chocolate or you'll lose your paint, but be sure to touch every part of the stamp to the surface of the chocolate. This technique is cool because it creates a bit of a texture along with a golden circle. Now you can also try this technique out once the dipped caramels have set up, but it might be hard to get a clean stamp because the surface of the set chocolate will have a slight curve to it. For sure it can be done though, so feel free to test it out. I was going to today, but I just had too many other ideas to show, so I decided not to. This next design is the same, but I'll be using the smaller star tip for the stamp, and thankfully this is small enough I can just dip it straight into my paint. Once again, try to touch the stamp onto the chocolate surface without going too deep. It's hard with these fine dots to get them completely even, but I kind of like it that way because then they naturally go from a little bit bigger to a little bit smaller, and that makes the design a bit more interesting to look at. While I've got my gold paint at the ready, I move over to some chocolates that are already set up. This is nothing too groundbreaking, a nice clean brush stroke. I'm using this fan brush, but you can play around with different sizes of brushes that cover the whole surface or less. I always love a classic brush stroke design. They just look nice. My first one I wasn't super happy with because I had too much paint on the brush. On the next two I dipped and then dabbed some off before doing the strokes, and then I built upon them. I like the look of when it starts dense and then gets thin and fades off across the chocolate. This next design I'll create using a toothpick. You could also do the same thing with a thin paintbrush, but that might require a steady hand. So just paint some gold onto the toothbrush and stamp it in a diagonal across the chocolate. Now I'm mixing up some rose gold luster paint to use with a sponge brush. You can test out different shapes if you'd like. I'm going to go with the round because I find that it's kind of hard to get a really clean and crisp shape to come through when you're stamping with these. Here I'm testing how much paint to get on the sponge and how much to dab off before I stamp the chocolate. So it's really simple, just stamp the rose gold onto the top of the chocolate to create this simple textured circle design. So I had a design that I was really excited about trying, but it was a design that had to be done while the chocolate was still wet, And somehow in all this decorating chaos, I miscalculated the amount of caramels and designs that I had. So I had no caramels left, but I did have 3 more dipped caramels that were set up left that hadn't been decorated yet. So I axed that design and decided maybe instead of doing it while it was wet, I could apply this design to the top by adding a dot of chocolate. So I had to retemper more milk chocolate just for these 3 chocolate dipped caramels. Here I am practicing the technique before I attempt it on the caramels, because after all that, I did not want to mess them up. I also had to test out the timing of when to spray. If you spray too late, the chocolate is already set up. If you spray too early, it doesn't leave as much texture. Anyway, so I piped a medium-sized dot onto the top of each chocolate, set a 1-minute timer, and then carefully sprayed each one with just air using my airbrush, using almost minimum airflow. And voila, a beautiful chocolate splash. I absolutely love how they turned out. Now let's reveal some of our sheet designs. Sadly, the diffraction grating sheet caramels are quite boring and oddly shaped at first, but they come alive when you shine a light on them. So I thought I clicked record to show you I was applying gold leaf to the zigzag caramels, but instead I clicked record only after they were finished. I finish up the crackled caramels with some dry gold luster dust. I do the same for the airbrushed caramels, and whoops, I forgot to tap off the excess first, but it kind of looks cool that thick, doesn't it? It looks like liquid gold. It gets so shiny when you keep brushing. And the next one I do a little bit less so that we can test out how much we like the best. So if you have small chocolate feet on some of the dipped caramels, you just simply grab a paring knife and carefully run it across the bottom to clean them up. And here are all of our finished designs close up. A little confession, my stupid caramel chocolate bloomed. It's because I was in a hurry and didn't pay close attention. Sadly, I don't think I had enough seeds left when I microwaved it, so it isn't fully tempered. If I had more time, I probably would have used my cryo for that too. And here's another teaching moment. You can see some streaking on just this one chocolate, and it must be because when I reheated my milk chocolate to keep it in temper, somehow some of the warmer, untempered chocolate from the edge of the bowl got onto this as I dipped it. So always be sure to stir really well when you're rewarming to keep your chocolate at working temperature, and try to incorporate all the chocolate from the edge really well. All right, guys, that's how you make beautiful hand-dipped caramels. Let me know down in the comments which of the decorations are your favorites. I was going to pick my 2 favorites to share with you, but I kind of couldn't decide, so I have 4. I'm really glad I took the extra time to do this decoration after all, because I think this is my top one, the airbrush one. It looks so cool, and it looks like liquid gold. It's so nice. I can't resist the crinkly one. It just looks so cool. I like it a lot. You're seeing a theme that all the ones I love have gold on them. Just the simple brush stroke one. It just looks nice and simple. I also love how the rose gold sponge brush one turned out. Just like simple and nice. Did I say I picked 4 or 5? I'm adding one more to the list. Call me crazy, but I really just love the simple, classic dipping fork design. Maybe just because it looks familiar and I don't know, I just like it. So I'm curious to hear which ones you guys like the most. Also, if you liked the video, please like the video. It helps me out a lot. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, today's the day. If you'd like to see something else that's sweet, just click on one of these thumbnails. Thanks so much for watching today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.